Get her out of my sight. Kang Do-hyun's voice cut through the penthouse like a blade dipped in ice. His jaw was tight. His eyes, darker than the Seoul midnight sky, didn't blink once as two of his men escorted the sobbing woman toward the elevator. She was draped in designer silk from head to toe. Her lips were injected. Her tears were manufactured. And the hidden recording device his security team had found stitched into the lining of her Chanel clutch told him everything he needed to know. Another one. Another perfectly polished, elegantly dressed snake trying to slither her way into his world. Whether it was for his money, his power, or the information they could sell to his enemies, they always came wrapped in the same disgusting packaging. Fake smiles. Fake curves. Fake everything. He loosened his tie and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked Gangnam. The city sparkled beneath him like a jewel box, but Do-hyun felt nothing. He hadn't felt anything in a long time. That's the third one this month, boss, said June, his right-hand man, stepping forward carefully. June had been with him since they were teenagers running errands for the old syndicate bosses. Now they ran the entire Kang empire together, but June still knew when to tread lightly. Do-hyun didn't turn around. Then your vetting process is garbage. She passed every background check. Her family is old money. Her father is broke and owes the Yoon Syndicate 40 million won. Do-hyun finally turned, and the look in his eyes made June take a half step back. I found that out in 10 minutes. You had 10 days. June lowered his head. It won't happen again. It won't, Do-hyun said quietly, and somehow that was more terrifying than if he had shouted. Because I'm done. No more arrangements. No more introductions. No more of these elegant parasites pretending they want me when all they want is what I have. He sat down on the leather sofa and poured himself a glass of whiskey. The amber liquid caught the light as he swirled it slowly. Every single one of them is the same, June. They walk in here smelling like roses, dressed like royalty, speaking in that soft rehearsed voice. And underneath all of it, they're rotting. I'm done entertaining it. June hesitated, then nodded. Understood. Now if you're already hooked and you want to see how this cold-hearted Mafia CEO's entire world gets turned upside down by the one woman he never expected, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now, drop a like, and settle in because this story is about to take you on a ride you will not forget. 3 weeks later, Do-hyun was seated in the private dining room of his restaurant in Itaewon, reviewing territory reports on his tablet, when his phone buzzed. It was a notification from the front desk of his building. A delivery. He ignored it. His staff handled deliveries. But then June called. Boss, there's a situation at the lobby. Do-hyun's eyes narrowed. What kind of situation? The delivery driver. She won't leave the package with security. Says she needs a direct signature from the recipient because it's a restricted pharmaceutical shipment. And she's not backing down. Do-hyun almost laughed. Almost. Then forge my signature and send her away. I tried. She said if we forge anything on a restricted medical shipment, she's legally required to report it, and she will. She pulled out the regulation handbook, boss. She's reading it to the security team right now. For the first time in weeks, something that wasn't irritation or boredom flickered across Do-hyun's face. It was curiosity. I'll be there in 15 minutes. He arrived at his corporate building in 12. The lobby of Kang Enterprises was all black marble, glass, and silence. His security team, for men who could each bench press a small car, stood in a loose semicircle around a woman who couldn't have been taller than 5'6". She was wearing a navy blue delivery uniform that was slightly too big for her. Her dark brown skin was glowing under the lobby's cold lighting, untouched by makeup. Her natural hair was pulled back into a practical puff. She had a clipboard in one hand and a regulation manual in the other, and she was reading from it with the calm authority of a courtroom lawyer. Section 14, subsection B clearly states that restricted pharmaceutical deliveries require a verified signature from the named recipient or a legally designated proxy with notarized documentation. You have provided neither. She looked up at the nearest security guard. So no, I'm not leaving this package with you. I don't care if your boss owns this building, the one next to it, and the one across the street. The law is the law. The security guards looked at each other helplessly. And Do-hyun stopped walking. He just stood there, 10 feet away, watching her. This woman in her oversized uniform with her scuffed work boots and her absolute refusal to be intimidated by men twice her size in a building that made most people whisper. She wasn't performing. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just doing her job, and she was doing it with a kind of stubborn integrity that hit him somewhere unexpected. I'm Kang Do-hyun, he said. She looked up. Their eyes met. He expected her to falter. Everyone did when they first saw him. He knew what he looked like. He knew the effect he had. He'd been weaponizing it since he was 22. But this woman just blinked, looked down at her clipboard, looked back at him, and said, ID, please. June, standing behind Do-hyun, made a sound like he'd been punched. Do-hyun stared at her. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? She held the clipboard against her chest. I don't know you. I've never seen you before. You could be anyone. I need government-issued identification to release this package. That's the protocol. Something shifted in Do-hyun's chest. Something dangerous and unfamiliar. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his ID. He handed it to her. She examined it carefully, compared it to the name on the shipment form, nodded once, and held out the electronic signature pad. Sign here, please. He signed. She tore off the receipt, handed him his copy, placed the package on the front desk, and said, Have a good evening, Mr. Kang. And then she turned around and walked out. No lingering glance. No flirtatious smile. No attempt to make conversation or slip him her number. She just left. Like he was any other name on any other delivery route. Do-hyun stood in his own lobby, holding a delivery receipt, feeling like the ground beneath his feet had just shifted 2 inches to the left. June. Yes, boss. Find out her name. June blinked. The delivery woman? Do-hyun didn't answer. He just walked toward the elevator, but he folded the receipt carefully and put it in his breast pocket. Her name was Nyla Carter. She was 26 years old. She'd moved to Seoul from Chicago 3 years ago after her mother passed away. She worked 2 jobs. During the day, she was a delivery driver for a logistics company. At night, she worked part-time at a small bakery in Mapogu, where she was slowly saving up money to open her own pastry shop. She lived alone in a tiny one-room apartment in a building that Do-hyun wouldn't house his lowest-ranking men in. She had no criminal record, no debt, no connections to any syndicate, and no social media presence to speak of. She was, in every possible way, the opposite of every woman who had ever tried to enter his life. And he couldn't stop thinking about her. Over the next 2 weeks, Do-hyun did something he had never done before. He created reasons for deliveries. Pharmaceutical supplies. Equipment. Documents that absolutely did not need to be hand-delivered but suddenly required restricted shipment protocols. And every single time, he specifically requested the same driver. Nyla noticed. By the 4th delivery, she looked up at him with those sharp brown eyes and said, You know, for a man who runs a corporation this size, you seem to have a very inefficient supply chain. Nobody orders this many restricted shipments in 2 weeks. He leaned against the lobby desk. Maybe I'm a very cautious businessman. Or maybe you're wasting my time and your money. She held out the signature pad. Sign. He signed, but this time, he didn't step back. Have dinner with me. She laughed. Not a polite, flattered laugh. A real laugh, like he'd told her the funniest joke she'd heard all year. No. Why not? Because I have a second job to get to, Mr. Kang. Some of us work for a living. She took the pad back. Have a good evening. She walked out again, and Do-hyun watched her go with something burning in his chest that he couldn't name and didn't want to. She said no, June observed from behind him, clearly trying not to smile. She said no today, Do-hyun replied. Tomorrow is a different day. But tomorrow, Nyla wasn't on the route. A different driver showed up, a nervous young man who nearly dropped the package when he realized who he was delivering to. Do-hyun signed without a word and felt an irritation so sharp it startled him. He called the logistics company. He was told that Nyla had been moved to a different district. By whose request, he demanded. Her supervisor's. There was a scheduling change. Do-hyun hung up and looked at June. By the logistics company. June stared at him. You want to buy an entire logistics company because they moved one delivery driver off your route? Did I stutter? 3 days later, Kong Enterprises acquired a 51% stake in Seoul Express Logistics. Do-hyun didn't change the management. He didn't interfere with operations. He simply made one request through 3 layers of corporate intermediaries so it wouldn't be traced back to him. He wanted driver number 247 reassigned to the Gangnam Corporate District. Nyla showed up the following Monday. She walked into the lobby with her clipboard, looked at the package, looked at the address, and then looked up at Do-hyun, who was standing by the elevator as if he just happened to be passing through. You did something, she said. I don't know what you're talking about. I was reassigned to Mapo. Now I'm back here. I've been doing this job long enough to know that route changes don't reverse themselves for no reason. She narrowed her eyes at him. What did you do? I signed for a delivery. That's all I've ever done. He met her eyes. Are you going to give me my package? She held his gaze for a long time. There was something new in her expression. Not anger. Not fear. Something that looked a lot like the thing he was feeling himself but would never admit. She handed him the package. You're a strange man, Mr. Kong. Do-hyun. Mr. Kong, she repeated firmly, but the corner of her mouth twitched. It was the tiniest almost smile, barely visible, gone in a second. And it ruined him. He started showing up at the bakery. The first time, he walked in at 9 p.m. wearing a 10 million won suit in a shop that sold pastries for 3,000 won each. The owner, a sweet elderly Korean woman named Mrs. Cho, nearly had a heart attack when she recognized him. But Nyla, who was behind the counter boxing up red bean buns, just looked at him with that same unbothered expression and said, We're closing in 30 minutes. Then I'd better order quickly. He looked at the display case. What do you recommend? That you find a bakery closer to your side of the city. Mrs. Cho gasped and swatted Nyla's arm. Nyla. That is Kang Do-hyun. You cannot speak to him that way. Nyla looked at Mrs. Cho with genuine confusion. Why not? He's a customer. I'm recommending he find a more convenient location. That's good customer service. Do-hyun bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. I'll take one of everything. He came back the next night. And the next. And the one after that. He always ordered too much, always left enormous tips that Nyla tried to refuse, and always stayed until closing, sitting at the small corner table, watching her work. She moved efficiently, without wasted motion. She was precise when she measured ingredients, gentle when she handled dough, focused when she decorated. She talked to Mrs. Cho in Korean that was imperfect but earnest, and she laughed at the old woman's jokes with her whole body. She wiped down tables without being asked. She restocked shelves without complaint. She never sat down during her entire shift. She was the most real person he had ever met, and it terrified him. On the 5th night, he waited until Mrs. Cho went to the back, and then he said, Why won't you let me take you to dinner? Nyla stopped wiping the counter. She didn't look up. Because I know who you are. The air in the room changed. I didn't at first, she continued, her voice quiet. But after you started showing up, I looked you up. Kang Do-hyun. CEO of Kong Enterprises. Youngest head of the Kong Syndicate in its history. You control half the underground operations in Seoul. You are dangerous, Mr. Kong. And I have worked too hard to build a life here to let anyone, especially a man like you, destroy it. She finally looked up, and her eyes were shining, but not with tears. With resolve. I'm not one of those women you're used to. I don't want your money. I don't want your power. I don't want your protection. I want to wake up every morning, go to work, save my money, and one day open my own shop. That's it. That's my whole dream. And it doesn't have room for a man who probably has enemies who would use me against him without thinking twice. Do-hyun sat very still. No one had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever laid out the truth so plainly, so honestly, so without agenda. You're right, he said. About all of it. I am dangerous. I do have enemies. And being near me is a risk. He stood up and walked toward the counter. He stopped right in front of her, close enough that she had to tilt her head up to look at him. But I have never in my life met a woman who made me want to be worth the risk. Until you. Nyla's breath caught. He saw it. The slight parting of her lips, the way her fingers tightened on the cloth she was holding, the way her eyes searched his face for the lie she was expecting to find. She didn't find one. One dinner, he said. Not at some overpriced restaurant. Not in a private room with bodyguards. Wherever you want. However you want. Just one. She stared at him for a long, agonizing moment. There's a pojamika by the river, she said finally. It's cheap, it's loud, and they don't take reservations. Perfect. Tomorrow. 7 o'clock. And you're not sending a car. I'll meet you there. He nodded. And for the first time in years, Kang Do-hyun smiled. Not the cold, calculated smile he used in negotiations. A real one. Nyla looked away quickly, but not before he saw the flush creeping up her neck. The next evening, Do-hyun showed up at the pojamika wearing the most casual clothes he owned, which still probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Nyla was already there, sitting on a plastic stool, wearing jeans, a cream sweater, and small gold hoops in her ears. Her hair was down, a gorgeous crown of coils that framed her face like a painting. He sat down across from her and said, "You look beautiful. You look like you've never sat on a plastic stool in your life." "I haven't." She smiled, and it was the first full smile she'd ever given him. It hit him like a bullet to the chest. They ate tteokbokki and drank soju and talked for 3 hours. She told him about her mother, about growing up on the south side of Chicago, about the days she decided to leave everything behind and start over in a country where she didn't speak the language. She told him about the loneliness of it, the beauty of it, the days she wanted to quit and the mornings she woke up grateful she hadn't. He told her things he'd never told anyone. About his father, the previous syndicate boss, who had raised him with fists and silence. About the night he took over the organization at 24 after his father's assassination. About the weight of an empire he never asked for and the loneliness of a throne no one could share. "You could walk away," she said. "No, I can't." "Why not?" "Because if I walk away, the people who depend on me have no one. And the people who want to destroy me will have no opposition." He looked at her. "I'm not a good man, Nyla. But I'm trying to be a necessary one." She reached across the table and put her hand over his. It was the first time she'd touched him voluntarily, and the contact sent electricity through every nerve in his body. "I think you might be better than you believe you are," she said softly. He turned his hand over and laced his fingers through hers. Neither of them let go. He walked her home that night. Her neighborhood was rough, the kind of area his men would flag as a security concern, and it made something protective and furious rise in him like a tide. But he said nothing. He understood pride. At her door, she turned to him. "I had a good time." "So did I. This doesn't mean anything has changed. I still think this is a terrible idea." "I know. And I'm still not going to be one of your women. I don't have women. I have headaches disguised as women. You're the first real person I've been around in years." She looked at him, and something broke open in her expression. Something vulnerable and afraid and desperately hoping. He cupped her face in his hands. His thumbs traced the curve of her cheekbones. She closed her eyes, and a tear slipped down her cheek. "I'm going to kiss you," he said. "And if you don't want me to, say so now." She opened her eyes. "You really should stop telling people what you're going to do before you do it. It ruins the element of surprise." He kissed her. It started soft, careful, like he was handling something precious and breakable. But then her hands fisted in the front of his jacket and she pulled him closer, and the kiss deepened into something raw and hungry and honest. He pressed her gently against the door, his body covering hers, one hand in her hair, the other gripping her waist like she might vanish if he let go. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathing hard. "Terrible idea," she whispered against his lips. "The worst," he agreed, and kissed her again. Now if you're feeling this story, if your heart is racing right now, I need you to hit that like button, drop a comment telling me your favorite part so far, and make sure you're subscribed because what's coming next is going to change everything. For 2 months, they existed in a bubble. Do-hyun would pick her up after her bakery shift, and they'd walk along the Han River or eat street food or sit in his car talking until the sun came up. He learned that she sang when she thought no one was listening, that she was afraid of thunderstorms, that she made the best sweet potato pie he'd ever tasted, and that she loved him with a quiet ferocity that made him feel like he was standing in sunlight for the first time in his life. She learned that he was ticklish on his left side, that he read poetry when he couldn't sleep, that his favorite color was the exact shade of brown of her eyes, and that beneath the armor of the most feared man in Seoul was a heart that had been starving for tenderness. He was careful. He kept her away from his world. She never went to his penthouse. She never met his men. He never discussed business in front of her. He was building a wall between her and everything dark in his life, and he was doing it brick by meticulous brick. But walls only work if no one is watching. And someone was always watching. Her name was Seo Yuna, and she was the woman Do-hyun had thrown out of his penthouse 3 months ago. The one with the recording device in her clutch. She came from a family that had once been powerful in the Seoul elite, but her father's gambling debts and her mother's scandals had reduced them to desperate social climbers clinging to the edges of high society with manicured fingernails. Yuna had been planted by the Yoon Syndicate, Do-hyun's chief rival, to get close to him. She had failed, and the Yoon boss, a cruel man named Yoon Tae-suk, did not tolerate failure. He had given her one chance to redeem herself. Find Kang Do-hyun's weakness. And now she had found it. She sat across from Yoon Tae-suk in his private office, sliding photographs across the desk. Do-hyun and Nyla at the Pojangmaka. Do-hyun and Nyla walking along the river. Do-hyun kissing Nyla at her door. "A delivery woman," Yuna said, her voice dripping with disbelief and jealousy. "He rejected me for a delivery woman. A foreigner." Yoon Tae-suk studied the photographs with the cold patience of a predator. "She's not just a delivery woman. She's leverage. What do you want me to do?" He looked up at her with dead eyes. "Nothing yet. We wait. Let him fall deeper. The deeper he falls, the more it will break him when we pull her away." The first sign of danger came on a Tuesday. Nyla was finishing a delivery in the Songpa district when she noticed a black sedan following her. It stayed 3 car lengths behind, never too close, never too far. She told herself she was being paranoid. She told herself it was nothing. But she'd grown up on the south side of Chicago, and her instincts had kept her alive in places far more dangerous than Seoul. She called Do-hyun. "Someone's following me." His voice went from warm to ice in half a second. "Where are you?" "Songpa. Near the Olympic Park exit. Pull over at the nearest convenience store. Go inside. Stay in view of the cameras. I'm sending June." "Do-hyun, maybe I'm overreacting." "You're not. Do what I said. Now." June arrived in 7 minutes with 3 men. The black sedan was gone by then, but when June reviewed the convenience store's exterior cameras, he got a partial plate number. It came back registered to a shell company owned by the Yoon Syndicate. Do-hyun destroyed his home office that night. He flipped the desk. He shattered the whiskey decanter against the wall. He put his fist through a framed painting worth more than most apartments. June stood in the doorway and waited for the storm to pass. "They know about her," Do-hyun said, his voice ragged. "They know. We can increase her security. Shadow teams. She won't even know they're there. She'll know. She notices everything." He pressed his palms against the window, his forehead touching the glass. "I did this. I put a target on her by being selfish enough to want her. You could end it. Do-hyun closed his eyes. The thought of ending it, of never seeing her again, of going back to the cold, empty existence he'd lived before she walked into his lobby with her clipboard and her regulations, felt like swallowing poison. I won't give her up. Then we protect her. With everything we have. He told Nyla that night. He sat across from her in her tiny apartment, and he told her everything. Not just about the car following her, but about who he really was. Not the sanitized version she'd read about online. The real version. The blood. The violence. The bodies. The empire built on fear and power and things that would make most people run. She sat very still through all of it. She didn't cry. She didn't interrupt. She listened the way she did everything else, with her full attention and her complete presence. When he finished, the silence was suffocating. You should leave me, he said. Any sane person would. Probably, she said. I won't blame you. I know. Nyla. Shut up for a second. She stood up and walked to the window. She looked out at the city lights, her arms wrapped around herself. My mother used to say that love isn't about finding someone safe. It's about finding someone worth being brave for. She turned to face him. I'm scared, Do-hyun. I've been scared since the first time you smiled at me because I knew right then, that you were going to change my life in ways I couldn't control. And I hate not being in control. She walked back to him and stood between his knees, looking down at him. He looked up at her, and for the first time in his adult life, the most powerful man in Seoul looked completely vulnerable. But I'd rather be scared with you than safe without you. He pulled her onto his lap and buried his face in her neck. She held him while his shoulders shook, and she said nothing because nothing needed to be said. That night, for the first time, she let him stay. They lay tangled together in her small bed, her back against his chest, his arms wrapped around her like he was shielding her from the entire world. He kissed the curve of her shoulder, the line of her neck, the soft space behind her ear. She turned in his arms and kissed him slowly, deeply, her hands exploring the planes of his chest, the ridges of scars she hadn't known were there. These, she whispered, tracing a long scar across his ribs. Old lessons from my father. She pressed her lips to the scar, and he exhaled a sound that was almost a sob. They made love slowly, reverently, with the kind of devastating tenderness that only exists between two people who understand exactly what they stand to lose. He whispered her name like a prayer. She held his face in her hands and watched his eyes the entire time, refusing to let him hide, refusing to let him retreat behind his walls. Afterward, he held her so tightly she could feel his heartbeat against her spine. I will burn this city to the ground before I let anyone touch you, he said into the darkness. She laced her fingers through his. Don't burn the city. Just come home to me. But the Yoon syndicate was already moving. 3 weeks later, Nyla was leaving the bakery after closing when a van pulled up. 3 men jumped out. Mrs. Cho screamed from inside the shop. Nyla fought. She fought with everything she had, the survival instincts of a girl who'd grown up fighting, but there were 3 of them and they were trained, and the last thing she felt before the darkness took her was a needle sliding into her neck. She woke up in a cold room with concrete walls and a single fluorescent light. Her wrists were zip-tied. Her mouth was dry. Her head pounded from whatever they'd injected her with. Yoon Tae-suk sat across from her in a metal chair, his legs crossed, looking at her the way a scientist looks at a specimen. So you're what Kang Do-hyun has been hiding, he said. I must say, I'm disappointed. I expected someone more impressive. Nyla's heart was hammering, but her voice came out steady. And I expected kidnappers to at least offer their victims a glass of water. We're both let down. Tae-suk's eyebrow twitched. You have a mouth on you. I've been told. He leaned forward. Here's what's going to happen. I'm going to send your boyfriend a video. In that video, you're going to tell him to surrender his territories on the south side of the river. If he does, you go free. If he doesn't, he won't. Tae-suk paused. Excuse me? He won't surrender his territories. Not for me. Not for anyone. You clearly don't know him at all if you think he will. She met Tae-suk's eyes with a steadiness that made the room feel smaller. And honestly, I wouldn't want him to. Those territories protect people. Real people with real lives. I'm one person. I'm not worth more than all of them. Tae-suk stared at her for a long time. Then he laughed, a cold, mirthless sound. You actually believe that? How refreshing. How stupid. He stood up and nodded to the camera in the corner. Make the video anyway. Let's see how noble Kang Do-hyun really is. Do-hyun received the video at 2:14 a.m. He watched it once. His face didn't change. His hands didn't shake. He set the phone down on his desk with the careful precision of a man who knows that if he allows himself to feel what he's feeling, he will become something that can never be undone. Then he looked at June and said 3 words. Call everyone in. Within an hour, 47 men stood in the underground level of Kang Enterprises. These weren't corporate employees. These were the Shadow Army, the men and women who operated in the spaces between law and power, the ones whose loyalty was bought with blood and earned with years. Do-hyun stood before them. His voice was calm. His eyes were anything but. The Yoon Syndicate has taken someone from me. This is not a negotiation. This is not a discussion. I want every safe house, every warehouse, every back alley operation they run turned inside out. I want Yoon Tae-suk's location within 3 hours. And I want the woman returned to me unharmed. Anyone who stands between me and that objective will not stand for long. He paused. Move. They moved. What happened over the next 4 hours would later be referred to in Seoul's underworld as the Night of the Kang. Do-hyun's forces hit 11 Yoon locations simultaneously. They dismantled operations that had taken years to build in a matter of minutes. They seized assets, captured lieutenants, and systematically tore through Tae-suk's empire with the surgical precision of a man who had been preparing for this war his entire life but had never had a reason personal enough to fight it. Do-hyun himself went to the location where Nyla was being held. He didn't send men ahead. He didn't wait for clearance. He walked through the front door of the abandoned warehouse with June at his side and a look on his face that made the 2 guards at the entrance drop their weapons without a word. He found her in the basement room, still zip-tied, still defiant, with a bruise forming on her left cheekbone where one of the guards had hit her for refusing to cry on camera. When he walked through the door, she looked up at him, and her composure finally cracked. Not into tears. Into relief so profound it looked like pain. Took you long enough, she whispered. He was on his knees in front of her in 2 strides, cutting the zip ties with a knife from his pocket, pulling her into his arms so hard she gasped. He held her head against his chest and pressed his lips to her hair, and his hands were shaking now, shaking so badly he couldn't hide it. I'm sorry, he said. I'm sorry. I should have. Don't. She pulled back and held his face. The bruise on her cheekbone made something murderous flash in his eyes, but she held him steady. Don't apologize for other people's cruelty. Just take me home. He carried her out of that building. She could have walked, but he carried her, and she let him because she understood that he needed to. Yoon Tae-suk was found by Do-hyun's men 2 hours later, trying to flee to Busan. He was brought to Do-hyun, who looked at the man who had dared to touch the only person in the world who mattered to him. You made a mistake, Do-hyun said. Tae-suk, bloodied and broken, spat on the floor. She's just a woman. There will be others. You're a fool for. Do-hyun hit him once. Just once. But it was enough. She's not just a woman, Do-hyun said, standing over him. She's the only reason I didn't burn your entire bloodline out of existence tonight. She asked me not to become a monster. So I'm going to honor that. You're going to leave Seoul. You're going to leave Korea. And if I ever hear your name again, if your shadow falls within 100 miles of her, there won't be enough of you left to identify. Tae-suk was escorted to the airport that morning. He never came back. But the fallout wasn't over. Co Yuna, desperate and cornered now that her benefactor was gone, made one final play. She went to the media with photos of Nyla and Do-hyun together, along with fabricated stories painting Nyla as a gold digger, a foreign con artist who had seduced a vulnerable businessman. The articles hit the internet on a Thursday morning. Nyla saw them on her phone while she was getting ready for work. The comments were vicious. Racist. Cruel. Words she'd heard before in different languages, but that cut the same way every time. She sat on the edge of her bed and read every single one because she believed in facing things head-on, even when they broke her heart. Do-hyun called her 17 times. She didn't answer. He showed up at her apartment at noon. She opened the door, and the look on her face nearly destroyed him. "They're calling me your pet," she said. "Your exotic plaything. They're saying I'm only with you for money. They're saying. I know what they're saying. And I'm going to." "What? What are you going to do, Do-hyun? Buy every media company in Korea? Threaten every journalist? This is what I was afraid of. This is why I said no in the first place." Her voice cracked. "I don't belong in your world. I've been pretending I could exist in it, but I can't. I'm a delivery driver. I'm a baker. I'm nobody. You are everything. That's not enough." She was crying now, and the sight of it was worse than any wound he'd ever received. "Love isn't enough when the world is designed to crush people like me for daring to reach above my station." He stepped forward and took her hands. She tried to pull away, but he held firm. "Not roughly. Never roughly. Just steadily. Listen to me. I have spent my entire life surrounded by people who perform. They perform elegance. They perform loyalty. They perform love. And I have hated every second of it because I could always see through it. Every smile was a lie. Every touch was a transaction." He brought her hands to his lips. "And then you walked into my lobby and asked me for my ID. And for the first time, I was looking at something real. You are the only real thing in my life, Nyla. And I will fight the entire world to keep you. Not because you need me to fight for you. I know you can fight for yourself. But because you deserve someone who's willing to." She searched his eyes, looking for the lie, the performance, the mask. She found nothing but raw, terrified, absolute love. "I found Yuna," he said quietly. "The woman who leaked the photos. She's been working with my enemies. She did this to hurt me through you." He paused. "I've already contacted my legal team. Every fabricated article will be retracted with a public apology by morning. And Yuna will face charges for conspiracy, defamation, and her involvement in your kidnapping. Do-hyun. But that's not enough." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small velvet box. Nyla's eyes went wide. "I was going to wait. I had a plan. A proper plan. But I don't want to wait anymore. I've spent too many years in the dark, and you are my light, and I'm not letting anyone, not Yuna, not the media, not a single soul on this earth, make you feel like you are anything less than extraordinary." He opened the box. Inside was a ring. Not a massive, ostentatious diamond designed to impress. It was a simple gold band with a small, perfect stone the color of warm honey. "It's a citron," he said. "The woman at the jewelry shop told me it represents joy and warmth and new beginnings. That's what you are to me. All of those things." He looked up at her from where he was now kneeling, this man who controlled empires, who commanded armies, who made the most powerful men in Seoul tremble, kneeling on the floor of a tiny apartment that smelled like vanilla and hope. "Marry me, Nyla. Not because I can give you the world, but because you already are mine." She stood there, tears streaming down her face, looking at this impossible man who had crashed into her carefully constructed life like a hurricane and rearranged every single thing she thought she knew about love and safety and belonging. She sank to her knees in front of him so they were eye to eye. "You're going to be a terrible husband," she said. "You work too much. You're way too intense. You bought an entire company just to get me back on your delivery route, which is actually insane. Is that a yes? You didn't let me finish." She put her hands on either side of his face. "You're going to be a terrible husband, and I'm going to love every single minute of it." She kissed him, and he slid the ring onto her finger, and somewhere in the city of Seoul, a delivery truck was running its route without its best driver, and an elderly bakery owner was telling every customer who walked in about how her Nyla was going to marry the most powerful man in Korea, and somewhere far away, Seo Yuna was learning that the consequences of cruelty have a way of coming back with interest. 6 months later, Nyla stood in the soft morning light of her brand new pastry shop in Samcheongdong. It was small, warm, and exactly what she'd always dreamed of. The sign above the door read, Nyla's, in both English and Korean. Mrs. Cho had come out of retirement to help her run it. Do Hyun had offered to fund the entire thing. She had refused. She'd used her own savings, supplemented by a small business loan she'd applied for and gotten on her own merits. He had respected that. He had simply shown up on opening day with 47 of his men, all of whom ordered pastries and left reviews so glowing they bordered on absurd. He stood behind her now, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder, watching the first customers trickle in. "Proud of you," he murmured against her ear. She leaned back into him. "You bought 17 croissants yesterday. You don't even like croissants." "I like your croissants." "You gave 12 of them to June. June likes croissants." She laughed, and the sound filled the shop like music, and Do Hyun held her tighter because he had learned that happiness was not something you could take for granted. It was something you held onto with both hands and protected with everything you had. He had spent his life surrounded by fake elegance, by manufactured beauty, by people who wore their worth on the outside and had nothing within. And then a woman in an oversized uniform had walked into his world and demanded his identification, and everything he thought he knew about love and weakness and strength had been rewritten. She was not elegant. She was something better. She was real. And in a world full of pretenders, real was the most extraordinary thing of all. Now if this story made your heart race, if it made you smile, cry, or scream at your screen, do me a huge favor and smash that like button right now. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already and turn on that notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment below and tell me, would you have said yes to Do Hyun? And what kind of story do you want to hear next? I read every single comment, and your suggestions literally shape what comes next on this channel. Share this video with someone who needs a good love story today, and I'll see you in the next one.